You remember her smile, but not her eyes. They were watching something behind you, something taller, sharper, less alive. A version of yourself built from poses, rehearsals, half-truths. You wore it like armor. It wore you like bait. There was a night, maybe 2, maybe 1,000, where she leaned in, whispered not to you, but to the role you played, the one with answers, the one with posture, the one who said, "I don't need you," in the exact tone that begged to be touched. She fed on that illusion, and you performed. You always performed. But now the mask doesn't come off. Now you dream of her fingers adjusting your collar, not in love, but in control. You dream of applause with no audience, desire with no direction. And you begin to ask, did she ever see you, or did she only ever see the light that made her shadow look beautiful? You began as something raw, unnamed, shivering beneath the sunlight of expectation. You were not born wearing the role it was given to you in fragments. A smirk from a woman who liked you better silent. A nod from a man who admired your dominance. A punishment for vulnerability. And slowly, the shape took form. It wasn't deception, not yet. It was survival. You trimmed the edges of your truth to fit inside a more desirable outline. One that spoke louder. One that knew where to look. One that made her laugh. And when she leaned closer, when she called you magnetic, you didn't notice that she was speaking not to you, but to the role rehearsed inside your skin. Every compliment was a nail in the coffin of your real face. You smiled in return, thinking it was connection. It wasn't. It was transaction. You became an actor whose life depended on the script, and the more you mastered your lines, the more addicted they became. But the applause you received was not for your soul. It was for your reflection. And reflections do not love. They demand continuation. You couldn't stop performing, even when alone. Your gestures still rehearsed themselves in the dark, still waited for her imaginary gaze. She didn't fall in love with you. She fell in love with the one who never cried, never doubted, never bled in front of her. And when you tried to show her the softness underneath, she recoiled not in cruelty, but in confusion. You had taught her, frame by frame, that you were invulnerable, that her role was to orbit you, not hold you. And when the gravity slipped, so did she. Her attraction was never to your truth, it was to your choreography. You thought charm was power, but it was a leash. You held the illusion in your hands, but it held you harder. When she said, "You've changed," she meant the spell was breaking, the character was slipping, the mask had cracked, and beneath it there was no mythology left, only skin, breath, and a trembling voice she had not signed up to soothe. And so she disappeared, not because you were real, but because reality demands effort, and illusion demands only attention. You had trained her to need only the latter. There is a punishment for being seen too early. There is a cost to peeling the mask before the fantasy is full. You pay in silence. You pay in the ache of her eyes looking through you as if you'd failed some ancient audition. And perhaps you did, because she never loved you, only the version of you that moved her story forward. The moment you stopped performing, the curtain fell, and in that absence, you learned the first brutal lesson. Performance seduces, presence confuses. You may think the answer is to become even more perfect, to edit the character again, refine the seduction, upgrade the illusion, but that is the trap. The mask, once accepted, does not release its wearer. It feeds, it tightens, it becomes indistinguishable from your own voice. You wake up reciting lines you never wrote. You smile in moments of collapse. You nod while choking, and no one suspects because you've trained them not to. Even now, you're wondering if this is true, not because you doubt the pain, but because the mask has whispered to you for so long that its voice sounds like your own. You were never praised for truth. You were rewarded for style. And so you built style into religion. You crafted identity from what others needed, not from what you knew. And the more you succeeded, the more you vanished. She does not remember your real laugh, only the one you practiced. She doesn't recall the weight in your silence, only the punchlines. And yet wasn't she the one who asked for more, who wanted you to be her anchor, her symbol, her protector, and her performer? All in one. Yes, but you said yes. You offered it. You held the sword and danced for her gaze, and when she clapped, you mistook it for love. This is the cruelty of desire. It rewards illusion faster than it rewards depth. And she, like you, was seduced by what appeared effortless. She thought your confidence was bloodless. She thought your composure was natural. She did not know it came from hunger, from discipline, from the 1,000 deaths you died behind the curtain. And you did not show her, not because you couldn't, but because you believed the truth would make her leave. And you were right. What she wanted was not a man. What she wanted was a myth wearing a man's face. One who never flinched, never doubted, never needed her more than she needed him. And you performed, God, you performed. Even when you hated her gaze, you performed. Even when it hollowed you, you gave more. You called it love, but it was ritual. She wasn't loving you. She was worshipping a mask built from your exhaustion. And here you are now, alone, but not truly, because the mask is still with you. It doesn't come off. It has grown into your posture, your voice, your smile at strangers. It nods when you're lying. It laughs when you're nervous. And when you meet someone new, it speaks first. She sees it before she sees you. And if she desires you, you know it's not for what lives beneath. It is for what performs above. The tragedy is this: you don't know how to stop. You can't undo the myth without unraveling the attention. You can't show the wound without losing the audience. You're no longer a man. You are a role in search of applause. And worse, you know it. You tried once to tell her the truth, to say you were tired, that you didn't want to be strong tonight, that you didn't want to be her fantasy, just her equal, her friend, her witness. But her eyes flickered, not in malice and disappointment. She didn't say it. She didn't have to. You read it in the silence. Don't ruin it. And so you smiled again. You swallowed your truth again. You bowed, and the mask kissed her for you. This is not deception. This is survival in a world that punishes the unmasked. But know this: the longer you wear it, the more it becomes your skin. And when you try to remove it, there will be nothing left underneath but the echo of who you might have been. She never raised her voice. She never commanded you. That would have made it obvious. No, she used softness as the bridle, worship as the rope. You mistook her admiration for surrender, but she wasn't kneeling. She was wrapping you in her gaze, molding you into the statue she needed to believe in. The more she adored you, the more she bound you, not with chains, but with the unspoken terror of disappointing her fantasy. You called it intimacy. She called it connection. But beneath it all, you were being carved. You wore her devotion like armor at first. How she looked at you, it made you feel real, necessary, powerful. But soon, you began to feel the weight of her expectations etched into the silence. You noticed that her touch lingered longer when you stood tall, not when you trembled. That her voice curled in satisfaction when you solved problems, not when you confessed them. You began performing strength, not because you wanted to manipulate her, but because you feared the collapse of what she believed you to be. She was the audience that kept your illusion alive, and losing her gaze meant death. That is the subtle tyranny of being idealized. You are no longer allowed to be human. She no longer desires your soul. She needs your performance to keep her own delusions intact. Your weakness would threaten the scaffolding of her worship. She would smile, still, but it would be hollow. You would hear her say it's okay, but the temperature of her eyes would drop by a single, irreversible degree, not out of malice, but out of grief. Because the role she needed you to play, the one that made her feel feminine, safe, righteous, was beginning to dissolve. Her love was not for you, it was for what you symbolized. You were the guardian of her story, the king in her fairy tale, the steady hand that allowed her chaos to feel poetic. She loved your silence because it let her voice echo. She loved your strength because it gave her permission to be fragile. But the moment you slipped, the moment your eyes filled with the questions you were never allowed to ask, the illusion cracked, and her loyalty became calculation. She never said she needed control, but she did. Not in the crude way men imagine, not with orders or ultimatums. No, her control was more elegant, more lethal. It came in the form of dependence. She made you believe that she couldn't live without you, that you were her anchor, her fire, her reason, and with every word of devotion, she asked you to die a little more for the myth. Because if you ever stopped being what she needed, her world would tremble. She couldn't allow that, so she praised you louder, she seduced you deeper, she performed gratitude so convincingly that you forgot you were being devoured. You thought you were leading, but you were being choreographed. You thought you were strong, but you were being softened, reshaped by her hunger for safety disguised as love. This is the cruelty of feminine desire. It admires you only when you remain in role. Once you begin to deviate, once you begin to question, her affection folds into disappointment. She doesn't scream. She simply stops looking at you the same. That's how you know the illusion is dying. That's how you know her devotion wasn't to you, it was to the power she felt beside you. She chose you not because of your truth, but because of your utility. You served a purpose. You validated her identity. You were the masculine shell she poured her longing into. But you forgot that purpose is not love. You confused being needed with being seen. And now, when she clutches your arm in public, when she tells her friends how incredible you are, you feel hollow, because you know she is praising a role, not a man. You know if you were to show her the rot inside, the fatigue, the shadow, she would not run, but she would withdraw. Her warmth would chill. Her kisses would taste like obligation. You see it now in the small things. The way she reacts when you pause, when you don't have an answer, when your hands shake. You see her flinch, subtly, a flash of discomfort. She doesn't want this version. She didn't agree to love a man with wounds, she agreed to love a monument. And monuments must not bleed. You have become her religion, and like all gods she has worshipped. You must not fall. She once said, "You make me feel safe." You thought it was a compliment, but it was a contract. It meant don't break character. It meant don't ever let me see your collapse. And in return, she would be loyal. As long as you wore the crown, as long as you didn't make her doubt the script she's recited since childhood, the one where the man always knows, always leads, always protects. But you are dying under the weight of this myth. You want to tell her that you're tired, that you're afraid, that sometimes you don't know who you are anymore. But the words die in your throat, not because she forbids them, but because you know she cannot hear them without grieving, without seeing the mask melt. And you love her enough not to hurt her with your truth. But what kind of love is that? The kind where silence becomes virtue and performance becomes worship. She holds you at night, unaware of the prison she's built with her tenderness. She strokes your hair and says, "You're everything I ever wanted," but her fingers trace the outline of the mask. And you let her, because it's the only version of you she can love. And so you become the man who solves her problems but hides his own. The man who touches her skin but not her soul. The man who says I'm fine when the void is screaming. Because that's what she adores. Not the rawness, not the bleeding truth, but the mask, polished, unwavering, cold. She does not want to dominate you, but she must. Because her entire vision of safety depends on your consistency, and consistency is death to the soul. It means you are never allowed to fall apart, never allowed to scream, never allowed to become something unfamiliar, because unfamiliarity threatens her illusion of control. And here is the final cruelty: she believes she loves you, and maybe she does in the way one loves a lighthouse. But a lighthouse doesn't get to drift. A lighthouse doesn't get to vanish. A lighthouse must stand, even when the sea inside it has already drowned. So you keep standing, not out of pride, but because you're too terrified to see her flinch when she sees your truth. Because if her devotion is the only thing left keeping you from collapse, then losing it might mean facing who you were before the performance began. And you're not sure that man still exists. You stand before her now, not in flesh, but in reflection, a man whose body still breathes, but whose image no longer belongs to him. Her eyes do not see you. They search for the rhythm you once gave her, the performance that stitched her identity to yours. And when you falter, when you hesitate, she blinks not out of anger, but out of dissonance. The mask is slipping, the scene is unrecognizable, and she does not know how to love a stranger. She smiles, but it is hollow. You speak, but she listens to the tone, not the words. You are becoming invisible in plain sight. That is the curse of playing a role too long. They forget you were ever something else. And when you scream not loudly, but inwardly, in the fractures of your breath, she hears nothing. She's watching a mirror now, a mirror you once polished with charm and control, a mirror that once reflected her fantasy, and you are the dust on its surface, the smudge that won't clean. You ask yourself, if she were to see me now, would she still want me if she saw the rot under the crown? The exhaustion inside the stillness, the trembling beneath my control, would she reach for me? Or recoil? But you never ask aloud. You know the answer. She would mourn, not the loss of you, but the death of her reflection. She would say things like, "You've changed," or "I don't feel safe anymore." But what she really means is, you are no longer the story I needed you to be. She doesn't love your truth. She loves the echo of herself she saw in you, the strong man who made her feel soft, the composed man who made her feel wild, the confident man who gave her permission to unravel. But that was never you, not entirely. That was the role, the mask, the curated self, the man sculpted not from being, but from watching her eyes for cues, her silence for approval, her sighs for reward. And when you tried to show her the real, the ache, the doubt, the unraveling thought, she flinched. Not because she was cruel, but because you were ruining the script, the one she clung to, the one that kept her fear at bay, the one where you were always the one who knew what to do. Now, when you look into her gaze, you see a demand not spoken, but seared into the moment. Perform, smile, nod, stay consistent, make it make sense. Because if you become uncertain, if you become human, her world collapses too. That is the unspoken contract she offers affection in exchange for your continuity. You offer identity in exchange for her worship. It is not love, it is symmetry. And symmetry is beautiful until it becomes a prison. You feel the mirror cracking, not just between you and her, but within yourself. You try to remember who you were before her eyes became your compass. You try to summon the version of you that didn't need to be adored, but he's buried beneath years of choreography, beneath practiced laughter, beneath the sentences you say without thinking. He's not gone, but he's grown silent, strangled by applause. Sometimes, in the dark, when she sleeps beside you and your body no longer needs to pretend, you whisper questions into the void. Who am I when no one is watching? Would I still stand if her gaze disappeared? Did I ever love her, or did I only love the feeling of being worshipped? You cannot answer, not because the answers don't exist, but because you've forgotten how to hear them. Her voice is louder in your mind than your own. Her needs have replaced your instincts. Her devotion, once a balm, is now a chain, not because she meant to bind you, but because you offered your soul as collateral for desire. And now she touches you, and you feel nothing, not because you've stopped loving, but because you've stopped being seen. The mirror does not touch, it reflects, and no matter how close she gets, you feel miles away, trapped behind the image she fell for. You tried once, didn't you, to break it? You tried to let her in. You told her a fear, a truth, a hunger you'd buried, and she listened, politely, with kind eyes. But something changed after that. Her touch cooled, her eyes wandered. She began to test you, not openly but in subtle ways. Did the mask come back? Is he still who I think he is? You saw her recalibrating, recalculating, and you realized her love is not unconditional. It is contingent on your reflection staying intact. And still, you stay, not because you are weak, but because the mask has become easier than the silence. At least when you perform, you are wanted. At least when you lie. She smiles, but when you try to be true, she blinks. She stares. She waits for you to return to form. You are not the man she loved. You are the mirror she loved looking into. And now, when your hands tremble, when your voice breaks, when your eyes blur with the weight of pretending she does not see you, she sees a glitch in the script, a flaw in the myth, and she waits for you to fix it. You begin to resent her, quietly, with politeness. You kiss her, but it tastes of detachment. You nod at her laughter, but it echoes in a room you no longer occupy. You make love like a ritual, like an obligation, because love, as she understands it, must never be uncertain. You must always want her. You must always be strong. You must always be the man who never falls. But inside, you are falling, not from grace, but from yourself. And the worst part is she doesn't notice, because the performance is still too convincing. You try to remember a moment when you were fully seen, a moment when you weren't her fantasy, her symbol, her protector, just you flawed, trembling, undone. But the memory escapes you, and so you begin to doubt it ever existed. Now, the mirror laughs, not out loud, but inside your chest. Every time you beg to be loved for who you are, the reflection mocks you, because you know the truth. You trained her to love the role, you never gave her the man. And now, it is too late to switch. She would say, I love you no matter what. But you know it isn't true, not because she lies, but because she cannot love what she cannot see. And you never showed her. You were too busy performing, too addicted to being adored, too terrified of being rejected as you truly are. So you stay silent, you play the part, you kiss her on the forehead, you ask about her day, you nod when she calls you her rock, And inside, you mourn. You mourn the man you might have been, the one who didn't need to wear a crown to be loved. But know this, the mirror only laughs when you beg because it knows you will not shatter it. You are still in love with the illusion. You are still afraid of being seen. And as long as that fear remains, you will never be free. Somewhere, in a forgotten room without windows, your real voice whispers into a cracked mirror. No one hears it, not even you. It speaks in riddles now, fragments of a self exiled from its own reflection. Her silhouette passes behind the glass, reaching not for you, but for the man she remembers, the one who never broke. You lift your hand, but your fingers touch nothing. A single breath fogs the glass. A name unspoken forms in condensation, not hers, not yours, but the one you buried when you learned to smile before speaking. The mask watches from the corner, still polished, still perfect, still waiting, and the silence. It doesn't forgive. It waits for the moment you choose to disappear for good, or finally speak. But even then, she may never hear you, because the one she loved was never listening.